Welcome back to the Growing Revolution. I'm Eric with Smart Pot Fabric Planters, and this week our guest is Michael Melendrez of Soil Secrets and Trees That Please in Los Lunas, New Mexico. He's passionate about people, plants, and especially soil health, so we wanted to invite him on the podcast to talk about his journey. So, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Eric, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for making the time. So, kind of getting to the beginning of the story, your father taught you a lot about the importance of soil health. What was he noticing in agriculture back in the day that prompted him to instill that into you as a child?
Well, we were farmers, and in southern New Mexico, in the area that is known as the chili capital of the world, Hatch, New Mexico. And but he also was a farm implement dealer for John Deere. And so he recognized a long time ago, when I was a little kid, that our soils were in decline. You know, they're just getting worse and worse and worse. And he blamed it on the use of fertilizers and the heavy equipment that we were using on our farms that were compacting the soil, and also just the constant plowing and laser leveling, which we do in New Mexico because we flood irrigate and we want that water to move evenly across the field. And he just blamed that on the cause of the decline of soil health. So that was a very strong influence on me.
Yeah. Well, that's cool that you had, an early upbringing into that, because most people don't even think about where their food comes from at all. So later in life, can you talk about how you discovered that the foods that we're eating are much lower in actual nutrition versus the same produce 50, 60 years ago? And can you briefly explain why that is the case? And is it better today, the same, or worse now than when you kind of learned this back in 1981?
It's probably considerably worse. And, and fortunately, we're seeing a movement, a paradigm shift taking place in agriculture where more and more farmers are recognizing that they need to do something to get themselves on the journey to better soil health. But what started me recognizing this situation was, already being familiar with soils, growing up on a farm, and I loved soils. I just loved the looking at soils, touching soils. Unlike my brother and my sisters, I enjoyed doing gardening in my mom's yard. And so I volunteered to do that kind of stuff because I just loved working with the dirt. And so back in 1968, when I was 13 years old, I was in a 4-H club called the Eagles 4-H Club in Doñana County, southern New Mexico. And I wanted to compete in the soil judging contest on the state level, which I did. And my father was the one who said, I can teach you how to do that. And so he took me all over the place and showed me, how to judge soils, looking at the texture of soil. You're manipulating it through your fingertips and looking at the percentage, or you're estimating the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. And consequently, being trained by my dad, I won the blue ribbon for the state, beating out kids that were a lot older than me. But while we were doing this, we were down on our hands and knees digging a hole in somebody's field. And my dad scooped up a handful of soil and was looking at it. And he said to me, Michael, everything we do in farming damages this. We need to do a better job of taking care of our soil. And so that had a profound impact on me that stayed with me into my college years and after college, where I was developing a wellness company. My education at that time was in human wellness, adult wellness, looking at all the different variables such as mental wellness, physical fitness, diet, etc. And so I started a company called Corpora Fit Systems. And one of the modalities, being diet, required that we had to figure out a way to analyze somebody's diet. Well, we did this by taking the USDA data on how much nutrition should be in any given food. How much vitamin C is in an orange, how much calcium is in an apple, et cetera, et cetera. And we plugged all that information into some software that I designed called NutriFit, that would allow us to break down somebody's diet, analyzing it, and giving some feedback to them in a printed report that would say, okay, you're getting enough of this nutrient, not enough of that nutrient, you need more protein, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but remember, this is all based on USDA information. So I became a little bit concerned that maybe this information wasn't entirely accurate. So I started sending off samples of fresh fruits and vegetables, including stuff that was grown organically, and I sent it to a food research lab and asked them to analyze it and tell me, how much nutrition is in this stuff. And the reports that I got back revealed that they were nowhere close to what the USDA said they should be at. Anywhere from 20, 25, 30% lower than what the USDA said. So I'm like, wow, even if you're attempting to eat a reasonable diet, are you getting a reasonable diet? And the answer is, of course not, because our food quality has been compromised. How did it get compromised? Well, going back to the same thing my dad said, it's all about the soil. If we're not treating the soil properly, if we're not feeding the soil, nurturing the natural process, then the soil is only going to go in one direction, and that's downhill. So I made a decision at that point that I was going to change my career path, and instead of working with corporations and trying to get their employees healthy, and really working with employees one-on-one, I needed to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, the 7 billion people living on this planet, and how do we affect them and in improving their health and their diet. And the only way to do that is to work with the soil. Let's find a way to improve the health of the soil. So that's when I started researching soils. Now, keep in mind, I started off in soils. When I first went into college, my field of study was in soils and agronomy and horticulture. And I didn't finish in that because my advisor convinced me that I was majoring in the wrong thing. So, and this advisor, his name was Dr. Boyce Williams. He was a soil science professor at New Mexico State University. And in 1974, as a freshman student there, I wrote a paper for him. And the title of the paper was Soil Ecology and the Soil Food Web. And I basically described the trophic levels of life in the soil, the microbes and who they are, and who's bigger than who, and who's going to get eaten by who, and every time somebody gets consumed by somebody else, there's always an excess of stuff that's going to flow into the soil environment and become a nutrient for a plant or for somebody else. And so the paper was a pretty lousy paper, to tell you the truth, but it got the point across in what I believed in. And Dr. Williams, when he was grading it, he called me into his office and he says, "What is this crap?" He said, "This is a soil science class, and this is not science. You need to go write me another paper." And he opened up his desk drawer and pulled out a rubber stamp. You remember rubber stamps? Oh, yeah. And inked it and put a grade on my paper. And the grade he gave me was BS. Bullshit. So I had to write another paper for him. But what I described as a soil food web is what we're still talking about today.
Absolutely.
And it's pretty much identical to what I was describing back in 1974. So anyway, that was my beginning. And then later on, Dr. Williams called me into his office and he says, "Michael, you need to change your degree. You're wasting your talent in this field. You're way too intelligent to be in this field. You need to go into something like engineering or chemistry or something that's going to take advantage of your potential." And So that kind of shook me up because I didn't have a whole lot of other interests at that time other than
Well, and here's a professor in that field discouraging you from entering
yeah,
the field. That's insane.
yeah, really. So I played the trombone. I was a musician,
Oh, nice.
and
I used to play the trombone as a
did you?
kid. Yep.
Yeah, so I actually played the trombone. I was on a music scholarship at New Mexico State University, and but I realized that there were a lot of people out there that were a heck of a lot better than me, and so my future as a professional trombone player was not promising. So the other thing that I was involved in at the time was athletics. You know, I competed in wrestling and ran track, and I ran marathons and did Ironman triathlons and competed in powerlifting. And so I enjoyed, trying to make my body a stronger and better body. And despite my shortcomings of not being a very big man, I'm only 5'7", and my dad, who was much taller than me, he used to joke and say, "Well, that Michael, he might be small, but he is slow." So, I tried hard to be an athlete, but I was just mediocre at it at best. But anyway, so my second choice of a field of study was sports medicine. And in 1974, 75, 76, there really wasn't such a thing as sports medicine. You couldn't really get a degree in that.
Right.
And so the closest thing you can get a degree in was physical therapy. And so I changed my universities and went to Albuquerque to the University of New Mexico and got enrolled in the corrective physical therapy program and finished up my undergraduate degree in that field. And so that's what really led me into the wellness concept and working with occupational and corporate wellness.
Yeah.
Was having studied the corrective physical therapy. So anyway, I went back to soil, and I like to say that I kind of snuck into the soil business through the back door. And so I began studying soils, and I remembered an experience that I had as a freshman taking a horticulture class where we were supposed to learn how to adjust the pH of the water so that the fertilizer would work. And the subject matter was a type of tree, little seedlings, called a liquid amber, or the sweet gum tree. They're native to the southeastern states, and usually a bottomland tree. They grow in wet soils. They don't grow in New Mexico. But for some reason, the professor who was teaching this class had a bunch of seed of sweet gum, and that's what we were going to grow and learn how to adjust the pH of the water. And obviously, if you weren't getting the formula right, if you weren't getting that pH adjusted just right, the fertilizer doesn't work, and the seedling then doesn't get what it needs, and it fails. So anyway, the seedlings all died on us, and we never could keep those darn seedlings alive. And years later, while getting into the tree business, I was really fascinated by the genus of oaks, Quercus. Albuquerque means white oak. Alba for white, and Querque is the Spanish derivative of the Latin Quercus. And so the Spanish people who settled Albuquerque in the 1600s, there were a lot of oak trees around Albuquerque, where Albuquerque is now. And so they gave it the formal name Albuquerque, a place of oaks or a place of white oaks. So I was very fascinated with oaks, and I started writing a lot of other people around the world who were also fascinated with oaks. And we became pen pals. This is before the internet. And we would even ship each other acorns so that we could grow our own collection of oak trees. So I ended up growing a collection of oak trees from all over the world. I have oak trees from Iran, from Romania, from Mexico, Vancouver, Canada, you name it. I have 47 different kinds of oaks growing in my collection. Wow. But anyway, while doing this, I met a fellow from Aiken, South Carolina, who had a nursery called Woodlanders. And he was also one of our pen pals. And knowing that the sweet gum, liquid amber, grows in that area, I asked him, I said, "Hey, what's the trick to growing that sweet gum tree? Because this is what happened to us when I was taking this horticulture class. And he says, well, what we do is we go out into the woods and we find a young sapling. And we dig it up, and it'll have real fleshy roots, real watery, fleshy roots. And we take it back to the house, and we put the roots into the wife's blender when she's not looking, and blend them all up and make a puree. And then we will strain the puree through a strainer basket and collect off the water. And then we'll water the seedlings, the germinating seed, we'll water it with that. And that solves your problem. And I'm like, wow. I mean, what's in that juice that solved that problem? He goes, I don't know, but it works every time. He goes, and you can do it with any tree, any native plant. If you're having trouble growing it, go out and find a wild one and dig up the roots and grind up the roots and water the seedlings with that juice, and it'll always work. So I started doing that, and son of a gun, if it didn't work. And so then I started digging deeper into it and started sending off samples of the microbes, or the juice, I should say, to different individuals, different universities, where I began having conversations with microbiologists and who had the ability to look at it on a molecular biology level and identify who are the microbes in that juice. And so you have a category of microbes that live on the surface of the roots, but you also have a category that live inside the root. Those living inside are called endophytic bacterium. And so we started learning who these microbes are, not quite knowing exactly what they're doing for that plant, but assuming that they're providing a benefit to the plant. Right. And so that was our birthing into the discovery process of microbiology in soils and plants. And well, today, we've gotten a lot more knowledgeable about it, and we can refer to reference libraries like the American Type Culture Collection, who are the global resource on microbiology, and we can go to them and say, well, I'm interested in this particular type of bacteria, and what can you tell me about it? What does it do for a plant? And does it make a particular enzyme? Does it make a chelating agent called a cerulophoore? What exactly does it do? And how do we propagate more of them? And they'll teach you how to do it. So, today, we've gone into the stratosphere of playing with microbes. And in fact, I don't know if you can see this very well, but it looks like dehydrated mashed potatoes.
Sure.
This is 100% bacteria. And so I grew this in my lab, creating a bacteria serum using known bacteria. I've done a metagenomics on this, and using Texas Tech University, and there are hundreds of species of bacteria in here, and we know exactly who they are. We know, if you look at this like on a pie chart, the demographics, I should say, of the microbial world, then you can see what percentage of that pie chart, how big of a slice of pie does each functional group of microbes take up in that arena. And so there's enough bacteria in here to treat about 1,000 acres of land, of farmland. Pretty amazing, isn't it?
It really is.
So and so what we did here is we grew them, and grew them in our lab, and we make a serum. And so you can see the level here, they're starting to settle out. And then we freeze dry them. Put them into a commercial freeze dryer, and freeze drying them into this. Why would we freeze dry them? Well, because freeze dried, they'll live forever. They're in a dormant state, of course, but they're still alive, and they become active again once we rehydrate them. And this is 100% miscible in water. So in other words, if we add it to water, we can run it through a drip irrigation system, and it can pass through very, very, very fine filters. So That's what, we've gone from digging up trees in the wild, to harvest the bacteria, to let's just grow them in our lab. Let's figure out, first of all, who are the bacteria, and how can we acquire a reference of what we call a reference material of those species, and then we grow them in the lab. That's what we're doing now. So we also use them to liquefy calcium. So that's liquid calcium. So now calcium is a limiting factor of, see that? Calcium is a limiting factor to plant health. And so if you're growing a crop in a region of the country that has high pH soils, you probably have a lot of calcium carbonate in the soil. But you can still have bitter pit in apples, or blossom end rot in tomatoes, which is basically a problem of failure to pick up calcium out of the soil. Right. Even though your soils are dominated by calcium, you can still have that problem. And so what we're basically looking at is how can we find a microbial solution to the calcium problem, where we can take a rock, calcium carbonate, and this product was actually made from travertine. You know what travertine is? Marble.
It's a type of marble, right?
It's a type of marble, yeah. So it's a very beautiful rock, and not far from my office, there's a travertine mine, a quarry. And so when they're sawing those blocks of travertine, which they're going to take somewhere and polish them and make beautiful panels or beautiful floors or whatever, the sawings is a real fine powder. And now that powder won't dissolve in water, because water is not a solvent to calcium carbonate or to calcium sulfate. Farmers all over the country will buy calcium carbonate, limestone, or calcium sulfate, gypsum, and put it in their fields trying to solve the problem of not getting enough calcium. They spend a ton of money on that. Doesn't work, or it works poorly. And it's because water is not a solvent for those two types of calciums. So, but if we can get bacteria involved, then the bacteria can actually get in there and take the calcium away from the carbonate or away from the sulfate and chelate it onto a cerulitophore. Cerulitophore is a small affinity chelating factor that will hold it in this chelated form. Basically, it's nanotechnology, but it's nature's nanotechnology. It's not us building nanoparticles, and it will basically hold it in that configuration so that a plant can drink it. You got to remember that a plant drinks only one thing: water. And so if that element, calcium, iron, zinc, phosphorus, potassium, whatever, is not in a form that it can stay in solution, it's not miscible in water, there's no way for it to get into that plant.
Right.
Right? So that's what we're doing. We're making calcium miscible in water so the plant can uptake it and solves your calcium problem.
Yeah.
And so now, I'm not particularly interested in making this for a farmer. I can if they want me to, but I'm more interested in creating the microbes that they can put down and let them do it on their own fields. So This is the path of least resistance, because this is only going to cost the farmer maybe around $20 to $30 an acre, and that's all. And also in here is going to be free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And those are bacteria that don't need a root system, like the bacteria that associate with your legumes. That are capable of fixing nitrogen, but those have to have a legume. These don't. These can do it in the soil without a plant. And so you have free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and then you have hundreds of other species. This is very, very diverse. So we have sold this, or sold the bacteria freeze-dried in a freeze-dried packet like that. That's 50 grams, and that'll treat an acre of land. So that's the bacteria story.
Nice.
So we're trying to look at looking at this from every possible angle, and what are the inputs that farmers have been trying to use that sometimes work and many times don't work. And having grown up on a farm and watching my dad going through the frustration of trying to be profitable, and my dad used to say, farming is the only business where we buy all of our inputs retail and then turn around and sell the final product wholesale.
I've heard that phrase many times.
Yeah, so it's difficult to make a profit and be sustainable, and of course, without profitability, you can't have sustainability, right? So my goal as the owner of Soil Secrets is to create inputs that are affordable, that work not just every once in a while, they work every time.
Yeah.
Okay, and also they get that farmer on the journey to to better soil health.
Yeah. How many species of microbes are you cultivating currently?
Well, there's hundreds in here, hundreds. And we gladly will show anybody who wants to see it the metagenomics on this. So we intentionally can grow. If we wanted to isolate it, we could probably pick, let's say, the top 3 or the top 5. And that we have a known benefit to a plant, and cultivate those. And we could do it that way too. And a lot of companies will do it that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But I tend to go both sides. I hit it from both directions. So we do claim in this 3 different species. Where we will declare and guarantee how many colony-forming units there are of those 3. But we will also show you the metagenomics on who else is in there.
Nice.
And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think the more the merrier. The more diversity in microbes you have, the more functions that are being performed in your soil can only benefit the plant. So
yeah.
I heard an interesting story that you told to Dustin, my coworker, about transforming a toxic soil property into basically now a flourishing arboretum, even though that you were told by your college professor, I think the same guy you mentioned before, that you won't be able to grow anything on that land. Did he ever see the transformation that you made, and how did you do it?
Well, yeah, this was, I was looking for a piece of land that I could build a home on in 1985. And I wanted to get out of Albuquerque. I didn't want to live in the city. So I wanted to go 20 miles, 30 miles south of Albuquerque into the valley, where I could have a little bit more land, maybe put a small orchard in, grow some food, and live a more rural lifestyle. And so I found some property, and it was summertime, and there was a lot of weeds growing there. There wasn't any irrigation going on, or nobody attempting to grow something on that land. It was growing a lot of filled bindweed. I don't know if you know what filled bindweed is, but it's a terrible, terrible weed. It's related to the morning glory.
Oh.
And
Okay.
but it's a perennial, and it'll grow in the most nasty of nasty soils. So anyway, I bought the land and started planting trees, and everything I planted died. Now, I already had a tree farm. I started a tree farm 2 years earlier, 20 miles south of that site, and was growing just regular old street trees that the landscape architects in Albuquerque were specifying. And so we would buy the trees as liners from a company out of Oregon, bring them in already pretty big, plant them in the ground, let them grow for a couple of years, ball and burlap them, and then sell them to the landscapers. And so I had a lot of trees. So I was planting trees on this land, and everything died. So I'm like, well, what the heck? What's going on here? So and every time I would dig a hole, it was an ordeal digging a hole. This clay required a concrete buster to dig through. And when dry, it was hard as a rock, and when wet, it was awful, really sticky. And you stick a shovel into it, and you couldn't get it back out.
Wow.
So I would try to dig $100 hole. They just say dig a humongous hole, dig all that nasty clay out of it, mix it with a bunch of organic matter, soil builder, peat moss, that kind of stuff. Put it back in the hole, plant your tree, and the tree would die. Then I would excavate the dead tree out, and it would smell like a rotting corpse.
Right.
All that organic matter had gone anaerobic, and
Right.
it was rotting anaerobically, and the roots of the tree were rotting anaerobically. And in my attempt to add all that organic matter to improve drainage, I was doing the opposite. I was actually hurting drainage. And so the holes got bigger. I just dug them deeper, and I'd dig a hole 5 feet deep, then get down to the bottom of that hole with an auger, with a hand auger, and auger down another 3 feet, to try to get drainage, and then I'd fill that augered hole with gravel.
Okay.
And it didn't work. Still rotted on me.
Wow.
So, but as I was digging these holes, I noticed there was a lot of white stuff in the clay, and there was layers of it, layers of these white lenses, I guess you could say. And I thought, well, it's just calcium, because we the pH of our soils in New Mexico are very, very high because of the high calcium. And the parent rock of our soils is limestone off the top of our mountains. Anyway, wintertime came around, and the soil turned white. It looked like it snowed. And I realized my problem wasn't that it was clay. My problem was that it was dispersed clay that had collapsed on itself because of the high salts. And the salts were precipitating out on the surface. We call that white alkali, or white death. And you can't grow anything in that.
Right.
And so you don't see it until wintertime. You don't see it in the summertime. So I started pulling soil samples, had them analyzed, and found out that I had a saline sodic alkaline clay, the vicious triad of horrible soil. And whenever a farmer has that kind of soil, they don't try to farm it. So I sent the analysis down to Dr. Boyce Williams at New Mexico State, and said, what do you think? And he called me up and he goes, what the hell, Mike? What are you doing? Didn't I teach you better than that? And I'm like, well, yeah.
Didn't I discourage you from growing plants?
Yeah. I said, well, can I fix it? And he goes, no. You cannot fix that. You can't fix white alkali. I recommend you put a for sale sign on that property and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm pretty stubborn, and that was a challenge to me. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to fix it. And so I started again using my microbial concoctions and playing with my rudimentary knowledge of humic acids and fulvic acid. Do you know what fulvic acid is?
Yeah, it's like the more refined version of humic acid, right? More brown, amber.
Yeah, it's kind of, see how that's yellow in color? So that's fulvic acid. And so fulvic acid comes from the Greek word fulvate, which means yellow. So if you take oxidized lignite coal, which is a very low quality coal that can't burn in a power plant, they call it humate also. And if you take that and grind it up into a powder, and then run a lot of hot water through it, it works better if the water is reverse osmosis water, because reverse osmosis water is ion starved, so it's going to strip the humate of anything that isn't tightly bound, to the humate particles, and you'll get a yellow water, right? Thus the word fulvate. And if you stick a pH meter in there, it's going to have a pH of about 3. So it's an acidic yellow water, and we the industry, the fertilizer industry, calls it fulvic acid. But that's implying that there's actually a molecule in there that's doing something of value, and not just yellow water that's acidic. You have to remember that water has no buffering capacity. So if I ran pure water through limestone, if I ground the limestone up, the limestone is going to have a pH of 8.2. And so if I had reverse osmosis water and I ran it through limestone, I'm going to get a water with a pH of 8.2. The water is going to match the limestone, not the other way around. And so since humate or oxidized lignite has a pH of anywhere from 3 to 4, when you run water through it, you're going to get a yellow water with a pH of 3 to 4. And but what's in it? Well, not much. And how do I know that? Well, because I analyzed it. And I did what's called a molecular characterization study using the help of Los Alamos National Laboratories and Sandia National Laboratories. But anyway, before I ever did that, because I didn't start that project until 1998, I was buying raw humate and fulvic acid from companies that made it, and was using lots of it on my land, trying to bioremediate the white alkali. And then I was also buying bacteria and from the American Type Culture Collection, and also growing some of my own. Remember, this is back in the 80s. I hadn't gotten very good at what I'm doing today. There's no comparison. And I was saturating the ground with this stuff, and then I was also feeding the ground protein. So because my theory was that many of these bacteria that are the best bacteria for bioremediating damaged soils, their food of preference is protein, amino acids. Mm-hmm. Amino acids are the building blocks of all life, not sugars. So it's interesting because a lot of organic farmers now will talk about using molasses, to help feed the microbes in the soil, or they'll put it in their compost tea. And actually, there are very, very few soil bacteria that can eat sugar. There are some nasty pathogenic microbes like Candida yeast that can eat sugar, and we don't want to be feeding them and encouraging them, because they also will eat the roots of your plant. So using molasses as a way to feed soil biology is a bad idea. But protein does work. So what was I using for protein at that time? Well, I would take pinto beans, and which is a favorite food in the Southwest, Mexican food. If you go to a Mexican restaurant, there's going to be pinto beans on the plate also, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we grow pinto beans in the Southwest. We grow them in New Mexico. We grow them in Colorado. And so they're easy to acquire. And what I would do is just run them through a hammer mill and turn it into a granular meal, mm-hmm. and spread that on the ground, and as a way of fertilizing the ground, providing a slow release nitrogen, because inside protein is nitrogen, right? And also, if you go back to the study of the soil food web, the microbes that are in the soil, their bodies contain protein. And when those microbes die, that protein goes into that food web, and as amino acids, the protein breaks down as amino acids, and some of that amino acids then become part of the nitrogen budget of plants. They can pick it up. Mm-hmm. So I was just doing it with pinto beans. And slowly the soils got better and better and better, and my trees started living. And then my selection, my collection of trees got better and better, bigger and bigger, and eventually I got to the point where I was able to grow. Do you know what a metasequoia is? The metasequoia is a ancestral redwood. It's the prehistoric redwood that today the California redwoods evolved from.
Okay.
And in the 1940s, they found a grove of them in a hidden valley in the interior of China. that had not gone extinct. They were still. It was like finding a Tyrannosaurus, in a lost valley.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the Metasequoia, or the common name is Dawn redwood, it prefers to grow in a very healthy soil. It doesn't like to grow in an alkaline soil. It hates salt, and it hates sodium. And so thinking of growing it in New Mexico is a crazy idea, because our soils are just not the right soils for it. Well, I have a grove of Dawn redwoods in my collection that are 70 feet tall now.
Wow.
The seed came from the Hidden Valley in China. I actually sponsored an expedition into China to collect seed off of the last 33 wild trees. And I brought that seed back to New Mexico, germinated it, and planted it in my collection.
Wow. And
they're growing in what was formerly white alkali, but it's not white alkali anymore. In fact, if you were to do an analysis of the soils and look for how much carbon is now in that soil, on a per acre basis going 1 foot deep, I've extrapolated the numbers and calculated that there's 360,000 pounds of carbon in that soil now. Where'd that carbon come from? Carbon sequestration out of the atmosphere. I basically created a pedogenesis on that site. Pedogenesis, the word pedo means soil, and genesis, of course, means creation. So I created a soil creation terraforming process on that site. So the soils now are rich and black in color and are very crumbly and have beautiful structure, beautiful aroma. And I have maples, sugar maples, California coastal redwood, California mountain redwoods, the giant sequoia. And the coastal redwood is growing there that has survived 22 degrees below zero Fahrenheit.
Really?
On that site. Coastal redwood can't tolerate below zero temperatures, period.
No.
Mine do.
How?
Soils. The soils have made them so healthy they can tolerate the cold.
That's insane.
I have giant timber bamboo from Japan. This is the bamboo that can get 100 feet tall with culms that big around. I have that growing there.
Nice.
And as well as the 47 different species of oak from all over the world.
Amazing.
And growing on what Dr. Boyce Williams said could not be fixed.
Yeah. Did he ever apologize to you, or give you a pat on the back at least?
No, he passed away a long time ago before he ever had a chance to see it.
Mm.
So
well, hopefully he's looking down from wherever he is, and
let's hope
smiling.
so. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it's a beautiful site, and I've had people from all over the world come and tour it, and that oak organization I was telling you about earlier, that became the International Oak Society, which I'm one of the founders of. We formalized the society in 1994, where all of us pen pals decided to meet at the Morton Arboretum in Chicago and see each other face to face for the first time. And 185 people showed up.
Nice.
Well, today it's a worldwide organization. We have members in China, Taiwan, Japan, Mexico, Argentina, all over Europe, Africa, Australia, New Zealand. It's a big organization now. We just hosted we have a conference every third year. And this past August, we hosted the conference in New Mexico, and where we did a pre and a post conference tour of the oak woodlands of New Mexico. Nice. We have a lot of oaks in New Mexico. I don't know if you may not know that, but we have a lot of species of oaks in New Mexico.
Very cool.
So, so that's kind of one of my feathers in my cap, is that I started that organization, and but we continue to do what we do, by learning more and more about soils, and we don't want to get stagnant. And that there's a lot more we have to learn. In fact, in
Sure.
2013, there was a worldwide conference on soils in Austria called the world's first humus experts meeting. And I was the invited speaker to represent North America. And so one of the first things I said to this audience of soil scientists and agronomists and carbon people who are into the biochar and all that kind of stuff is I said, I hate to disappoint you all, but I am not an expert on soils. None of us are. You know, that all of us are at the very bottom of the learning curve here, and we have a lot to learn. And so if you're not willing to accept the fact that you're at the bottom of this learning curve, then you're not going to learn. So keep your mind open. And so that's kind of how I've approached it all these years, and that's also why I got very curious about fulvic acid and humic acid, and started reading the literature on it, and I discovered that nobody has ever found it. There is no molecular description of humic acid or fulvic acid in the compendium database of chemistry. If you're a professional chemist and you want to know what a molecule looks like, you go to the compendium database called the cache registry and look at that molecule. It doesn't exist. And so I thought, well, wow, we're selling humic acids to farmers. What are we selling them? Or we're selling fulvic acid. What are we selling them? If we don't even know what it is. And the method of analysis that the state agencies require us to use so that we can put a number on the label, what percent humic acid or what percent fulvic acid, there's no standardized method of analysis for doing that.
Right.
And so it's a guess. We're just guessing. It's kind of like if I wanted to know the population of Albuquerque, but I didn't have the time or the money to go door to door and count everybody. So instead, I got on Google Earth. And I looked at the city of Albuquerque from the air and said, well, it covers 110 square miles, and guessing that there's so many people per square mile, the population is this.
Right.
How accurate is that going to be?
Yeah.
Not very accurate. But that's essentially what we're doing with humic acid analysis, is we're just guessing.
Yeah.
So that's when I went to Sandia and Los Alamos Labs and said, can you guys analyze this stuff and help me figure out what is it really? Why does it work? What are the molecular characteristics of it, and the geometry of the molecules? And so they agreed to do that for me, and we got it accomplished. So it's we're now able to actually make a real humic acid product because of that knowledge that we have on it.
Yeah.
So this was done using a molecular characterization study under contract. A contract is called a commercial proprietary information contract. The national labs will do that for commercial entities. If you didn't know, Los Alamos Labs is where they invented and built the first atomic bomb.
Yep.
The Manhattan Project. So New Mexico is lucky in that we have two of the largest, most expensive national nuclear labs in the United States, are both in New Mexico. And they can do stuff that no university can do.
Well, that's priceless to have that access close by to you, and kind of getting into the humics. You've got a product, TerraPro, and can you explain how you came up with it and how it's different from other products that are available?
Yeah, I was actually trying to patent a liquid humic acid, and I had a provisional patent on it. And my claim was that I had figured out how to extract from humate the humic acid fraction without using a solvent. The solvent being a powerful uh, uh, high pH chemical like potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide. That's basically what Drano is. You know, if you got a plugged up drain in your bathroom, you buy Drano and pour it in there, and it dissolves whatever's plugging it up, hair or whatever's in there, because it's a solvent. It's a very powerful base extraction, basically. So if you take your finger and dip it into a liquid bottle of potassium hydroxide and stir it, pull your finger out, you'll just have a bone hanging there.
Mm-hmm.
It'll dissolve it pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it sounded crazy that we would liquefy humate with that nasty of a chemical and then put it on farm soil and claim it's going to do something beneficial to that farm soil. And it just didn't make any sense. And not only that, but we're calling it humic acid, implying that it's going to be acidic. But if you stick a pH meter into it, it's going to be highly alkaline, not acidic. It'll be the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It'll have a high pH. So anyway, I worked with enzymes that came from different kinds of white rot fungi, and was able to liquefy humate using those enzymes. And I wanted to patent it. And but I had to also prove that there was actually humic acid in that liquid and not just carbon, making it black.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I went to the national laboratories to help me do that. And I first offered this research grant to universities. I offered it to every university in the country that I could find that had a soil lab. I gave them a statement of work and what my deliverables were that I wanted back. And the universities that bothered to answer me basically said, we don't know how to do that. So that kind of explained to me why we don't know how to do that, right? Because the universities don't know how to do it. And so that's when I turned to Los Alamos Labs. I went to Los Alamos Labs first, and I had to get Sandia involved because Sandia has equipment that Los Alamos does not have. So we had to get them both involved. Anyway, so going back to what the heck is humic acid, if I'm claiming that my product has humic acid, I got to first discover what humic acid is. So we started pulling soil samples from pristine soil sites that had not been disturbed, had not been farmed, that had a fairly deep topsoil. And we collected that soil and sent it to the labs, and the labs then purified from the soil the fraction of that, what we call the recalcitrant carbon fraction. The recalcitrant fraction is that part of the humus that will not decay. So in humus, when we look at topsoil, the stuff that's making that soil look dark in color or even black is humus. And some people say, well, stable humus. Well, that doesn't mean anything. You have two types of humus. You have humus that is going to rapidly break down, be eaten by microbes or oxidize and turn back into carbon dioxide. That's called labile carbon. And then you have the other kind of carbon that will persist in the soil for thousands of years. It is not food for microbes. It will not oxidize. It will not break down and turn into carbon dioxide. It does accumulate. So that's the fraction that we call humic substances. So we purified that from the soil using techniques similar to what we use in medicine when we're purifying enzymes out of your body. Or, for example, Dr. Sidney Pesca, who was the first person to describe interferon, which is part of our immune system. He had to do a purification to get it out of our body before he could do a molecular characterization. So we used a similar process so that we wouldn't damage. If there was a molecule in there that was doing something that was significant, we didn't want to damage it before we had a chance to analyze it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's what we did. And then we also analyzed my liquid and my granular At the time, we called it Earth Magic, not TerraPro. And using the same technique to basically see, had I made something that was bioidentical to what is in the soil? And the answer was no. I had failed. And but it gave me the knowledge I needed to have in order to make it bioidentical. So what TerraPro is today is a bioidentical substance of carbon molecules. I call it a carbon matrix. I really don't like the term humic acid. We have to use it because in order to register the label in places like California, the only term they recognize is humic acid. And so I have to use a method of analysis that they approve and then put a number on that bag saying this is what percent humic acid it contains.
Right.
And and that particular method is called the CDFA method for California. The bag of TerraPro is going to come out at 45% humic acid. In reality, it's 100% carbon matrix. And so the carbon matrix are actually molecules that are supramolecular. That basically means that these molecules are of various sizes, and they will self-assemble into a bigger substance called a supramolecular substance. And they do this on their own without an outside influence. So this is sort of like thinking about if you had a puzzle of 10,000 pieces, and when you put the puzzle together, it's the Mona Lisa. So if you were to take that puzzle and dump it on your kitchen floor in a big pile of pieces, and then you leave and go to have lunch somewhere, when you get back from lunch, the puzzle has put itself together.
Mm-hmm.
And you can mess it all up, and it'll do it again, and it'll put it back together exactly the same way. So when the carbon matrix is that way also, it puts itself together exactly the same way every time. Isn't that amazing? And these molecules are generating an electrical charge. They're massive induced magnetic fields. And that's what makes them work.
Yeah.
One of their characteristics that benefits us in the Southwest, because water isn't real common out here, you know, we have to irrigate to grow a crop, and if you go to some place like Saudi Arabia, you know, where they're pumping groundwater to grow alfalfa out in the desert, this would really benefit them in a huge way. The electrical charge of TerraPro can attract and hold water. It's a powerful humectant. So one way of understanding what we say about an electrical charge holding water is if you were to take an empty water bottle. If I took this Gatorade bottle once I'm done drinking it, and if I were to rub it on a stack of paper towels vigorously for a few minutes, and while I'm doing that, I turn on my water faucet to my kitchen sink, so I'm getting a slow stream of water. And after rubbing and rubbing and rubbing and rubbing and rubbing for quite a while, if I hold that water bottle next to that stream of water, the water will bend and go towards the bottle. Because I built up a charge in this bottle. So the carbon matrix does the same thing. It's building up a charge, which is going to attract water. But not only does it attract water, it's a polar substance. It has a positive and a negative part of the molecule. So it can if you have a nutrient that has a negative charge, it can be attracted to a positive side of the molecule, or the other side. So both cations and anions can be attracted to the molecule, chelating it in essence and holding it so that we don't lose it.
Right.
So, for example, in the northeastern part of the country, the soils are very acidic. And they're acidic because they're low in nutrients. They don't have very many minerals in them. And because of the parent rock that they came from, the parent rock didn't have minerals either. And so farmers will lime their soil, so that they don't have the disease problems caused by a lack of calcium. They'll lime their soil. But the problem is every time it rains, the lime will just leach through the soil and disappear.
Mm-hmm.
The soil, lime or calcium has it's a cation, so it has a positive charge. And the soil particle has a negative charge. Well, the negative charge of the soil, what we call the electrical negativity factor, or cation exchange capacity, if it's weak, then it's not going to grab any of that calcium, and it just leaches down into the groundwater and you lose it. Or you're fertilizing with a nitrogen fertilizer, and as the fertilizer goes through the nitrogen cycle in the soil, it eventually turns into a nitrate. And a nitrate has a negative charge. Your soil has a negative charge. And anyone who's ever played with magnets knows that when you try to put negative facing negative, they repel each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the nitrate is repelled by the soil particle because it's negative and negative, and then the water, the irrigation water or the rain, leaches the nitrate down into your groundwater, and now we just polluted the groundwater with nitrates.
Right.
Well, we could put something in the soil that had a powerful positive charge, then it could grab a hold of that nitrate and it won't leach, and you get better use of your nitrogen fertilizer. And we all know that 90% or more of the fertilizer that a farmer buys never gets used by the crop.
Right.
So this is a way to help a farmer not have to buy as much fertilizer, and because remember, 90% or more never gets used anyway. So let's back off 90%, so that the 10% gets used. It stays in the soil and gets used.
Yeah.
Huge savings to the farmer.